The 2022 Subaru BRZ has more power, a stiffer chassis, and swoopy new looks. But is it a better car? We've got one in the shop, and we'll also take it to the track to find out just that. When the Toyota 86 and Subaru BRZ were introduced, they were kind of a revelation. There was really no other car like this on the marketplace, a small, four-place coupe, but designed really as a personal sports car. And even today in 2022, now that we're into a second generation of these, it kind of sits off on its own as a very unique, affordable rear-wheel drive sports car. Now we're into generation 2 on these, which in this case means more horsepower, as much as 25 more horsepower from the early automatic cars to today's 228 horsepower car, and a 60% stiffer chassis according to press materials from Subaru and Toyota. Now, what does that all mean to the driving experience though? Well, we took it to the track. We'll find out what our results were on that shortly, but let's talk about the street manners first a little bit. So the first asterisk I want to throw in here is the fact that this particular test car is a 6-speed automatic. Now, I know we are a performance magazine, we're a performance-based outlet, which usually means the manual transmission option when that is available. This was the only thing in the press fleet right now, so we took it to the track anyway, we drove it around, and the first thing I'm going to tell you is that it's not half bad. The automatic actually really works nicely with this engine, and it does have a set of paddle shifters. Now, it's a traditional torque converter automatic, but it does have a manual mode, which will lock into each gear if you don't manually upshift it. So if you're trying to hold a gear, say in an autocross situation, it will hit that rev limiter for as long as you want to stay on it without automatically shifting itself up there. Especially in the lower gears too, it provides really nice throttle response and really good ability to balance the car with the throttle. So you can make the argument that you're not really giving up much with the automatic in this car. And when you see the data we got from the track, you'll see even closer that they kind of onto something there. Now, I'm not saying the automatic is the best performance option. We can't wait to actually test a proper manual version of this, and as soon as we do, you'll have that data as well. When we found out the press fleet was going to drop off an automatic equipped Subaru BRZ, we actually had the discussion that, you know what, we probably don't need to take this thing to the track. It's an automatic, it's not gonna be that great. I'm so happy that we made the decision to actually take this thing out and test it, because the numbers we saw on that data honestly surprised and shocked me. I could not be more blown away by the acceleration of this car out of corners. You really hardly ever feel that automatic is holding you back. Maybe once you get up in fourth gear, you can feel that wind resistance and that fluid coupling of the torque converter starting to struggle with each other. But again, until we test a proper manual equipped car, boy, I just don't think you are giving up a lot by having the automatic in this car. Now, there are a few spots where that paddle shifter doesn't quite shift as precisely or as quickly as a true dual clutch automatic, especially on the downshifts. In fact, if you're going from third down into second gear for a corner, you really have to wait on that shift until you're just about to turn in, because if you try and downshift at too high a speed, it won't let you do it. So you really have to wait till you're well down into that second gear range and do that downshift. By the end of the day, after 3 or 4 short track sessions, I was getting used to the timing. So somebody out doing this every weekend, gonna get used to that pretty quick, but that's something you might notice your first uses of that automatic equipped Subaru BRZ if you are taking it to the track. Everything inside ergonomically is pretty good. I'm not going to say perfect, because one person's definition of perfect is not gonna mean the same thing to everybody. But for most people, this is going to be a very nice driving experience. There is a little bit of a headroom issue, especially with a helmet on. Now, I'm not anybody that you're ever going to accuse of being a tall person. I'm like 5.5 feet tall with a tailwind, but with a helmet on, I was not able to sit in my desired position, which admittedly is fairly upright. I had to lean the seat back back just a little bit more than I typically like to. So if you're tall, if you're going to be wearing a helmet in the car, you might want to try one on before making that $30,000 plus or minus commitment for what Subaru wants for one of these. I do have a couple complaints. Those mostly revolve around sound. Really quite noisy inside the car. A lot of tire noise, which is not necessarily the fault of the tires, but more the fault of sort of a lack of sound deadening, which is a bit of a double-edged sword. Sound deadening usually means more weight, more mass. So they have kept this car under 2,900 pounds, but they've done so by maybe cutting a few of those additional mass things out of there that reduce some of that road noise. If that's something you can live with, I certainly can, especially in a performance car, you're fine. If you're looking for a dead quiet luxury car ride on the road without a lot of additional sound, this might not be your ideal situation. A little bit more noise than I'd like to hear. Also, while the new engine has fantastic manners, great response, great power, it still doesn't sound like a performance engine. I know that is a petty complaint to level at a car that is otherwise very, very good. But we've put people on the moon. We can make a horizontally opposed four-cylinder sound better than this, I would hope. So again, petty complaint, but if you're really, really wanting to find fault, those are a couple of faults that I definitely had with the car. The real story though is what makes this thing tick. So we're gonna put it up in the air, take a look at some of the pieces underneath, and we're going to take this car to the official test track of Grassroots Motorsports, the Florida International Rally and Motorsports Park, the firm in Keystone Heights, Florida. And we're gonna run some track times with it, see if it's faster than the 2020 Toyota 86 we most recently tested. So we're looking at the data now from our best lap at the firm, which was a 1-minute 23.16 second lap. Now, if you're at all familiar with lap times we've turned there before, you instantly know that that is considerably faster. In fact, more than 5 seconds faster than the 2020 Toyota 86 that we tested there. In fact, I'll bring that lap up now. That one's depicted in red, and the current car, the 2022, is depicted in blue. And you can see a dramatic difference in the way these two cars accelerate. In fact, let's look at one of the most dramatic sections of acceleration here, which is going to be coming out of this fairly slow second gear section. We're coming out about 46 miles an hour. You can see our speed through this corner nearly matched in both cars. I'll expand this a little bit so you can see just how dramatic the difference is. Our minimum speed through that corner matched in both cases, right about 46.5 miles an hour. But as soon as we were back on the throttle, the 2022 car began out accelerating the 2020 car. You can see that blue line rising at both a faster rate and staying higher than the red line representing the older car. So instantly you see how much of a difference that power is making. You can really see that difference as well if we scroll down here to this area where we're accelerating out of a very slow second gear corner. Again, our minimum speeds are right about the same spot. Through second gear, we can see both these cars, both the 2022 in blue and the 2020 in red, hanging with each other pretty well. As soon as that 2020 car shifts into third though, the 2022 car just leaves it behind and ends up with a much higher top speed. So in this comparison, we're actually comparing a car that this BRZ is way closer to, and that is a 2021 Honda Civic Type R. I never thought I'd be saying those words. First thing you see is, yes, an additional 75 horsepower. The Civic Type R is over 300. Does make a difference in some of these longer straightaways. But even in our highest speed area here, we can see that exiting this long left-hand sweeper, both the BRZ and the Type R going through this sweeper right about the same speed. We can see both the cars right here. Now, as we exit, that Civic Type R gets a little bit of an advantage from that additional horsepower, but as we see these cars accelerate out, they are both on a very, very similar curve and very, very close to each other. Much closer than I would expect them to be, considering the Civic has a 75 horsepower advantage. Now that we've analyzed all this data, let's get it back in the shop, get it up on the lift, and see what magic lies under this 2022 Subaru BRZ. In the front, very familiar to anybody that's got any generation BRZ or Toyota 86. Strut setup with a combination trailing arm, lower A arm on that. Not really a lot of built-in adjustment for camber or caster in here, but if you do want to adjust camber, you're probably going to have to go with a different size bolt in these knuckles here, or do some adjustment up there at the top. And there's not much room, there's not much slop built in to get camber in the stock form. You can maybe get, you know, half a degree of negative camber through some of these bolt tolerances, but one of the kind of limitations of this thing is not a ton of stock negative camber in the front as it comes out of the showroom. But it does manage to be a very engaging, very responsive car nonetheless. Brakes actually feel nicer than their size would lead you to believe. Dual piston calipers in the front, single piston calipers in the back. But as we saw in our track testing, pretty good reserve of stopping capacity. You do get a little bit of fade with the stock pads, and these stock pads have been through a lot of other journalists besides ourselves, so they're pretty down close to the wear limit. But actually it gives you a nice responsive pedal and the ability to adjust the attitude of the car with the brakes on corner entry. In the rear, a little bit more sophisticated suspension actually than the front. No struts in the rear. Instead, we have this sort of multi-link upper and lower A-arm configuration with a dual-piece lower A-arm made up of this trailing arm and this control arm. Unfortunately, still no real provision for camber adjustment here at this lower A-arm. We do have some eccentric cams here on these tie rods that we use to adjust rear toe, so no actual threaded tie rods, but rather an eccentric cam adjuster we'll use to make rear toe adjustments. Torsion differential is standard in all of these BRZs for 2022, which is a nice touch, and lots of, actually 4 big bushings locating this rear end, which is probably overkill considering these things don't, even with the increased horsepower for 2022, don't produce a ton of horsepower, but that's actually going to provide some nice control for this rear end. And eventually the aftermarket will get wise and start making a little bit more aggressive bushings, especially for back here, and helping you stiffen up that drivetrain even more. So lots of potential here, especially for the aftermarket. But out of the showroom, you're going to be hard pressed to make a lot of real specific adjustments, especially when it comes down to camber. Doesn't mean you're not going to be able to make the car handle fantastically, because the balance and the feel of the car out of the showroom is pretty good to begin with. But to make those real specific adjustments, especially as autocrossers or track enthusiasts, we like to maximize that negative camber value. Not a lot of provision out of the factory to do it on this car, unfortunately. Folks, if you like the content we're producing here at Grassroots Motorsports, you can go right down here, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, give us a thumbs up, click that bell to make sure you get notified of all of our new content. Check us out online at grassrootsmotorsports.com, and tell us what you think about the new Subaru BRZ and whether you think an automatic can actually keep up with a proper manual equipped car. The data sure shows that it might be able to. Go down in those comments. Let us know what you think about the new BRZ. Until next time, folks, we will see you at the track. Don't forget to visit us online at grassrootsmotorsports.com.
Support brands that support Grassroots Motorsports. Get your chemical solutions from CRC Industries. Visit crcindustries.com to learn more.